The mozzarella in your fridge has 10 ingredients. Real mozzarella has 2. Only one of them is milk. My name is Samuel Mast. I farmed 200 acres of Amish land in Millersburg, Ohio, for 30 years. We made our own cheese, mozzarella, cheddar, parmesan. We never bought cheese from a store. Not a single block in 30 years. I left my community and watched my neighbors pay $8 for cheese we made for $1. Today, I'm telling you everything. Store mozzarella is not simple anymore. Pick up a bag of shredded mozzarella and read the label. Milk, cultures, salt, rennet, then keep reading. Potato starch, cellulose, natamycin, calcium chloride. Some bags list 8 or 9 ingredients for something that should only need 2. Real mozzarella needs milk and citric acid. That's it. No culture, aging for weeks. No rennet from a bottle. No powder from a lab. This is the fastest cheese Amish kitchens ever made, and it takes 30 minutes from start to finish. This is different from the Parmesan I taught before. Parmesan takes months. Mozzarella takes half an hour. It is the cheese Amish mothers made when company was coming that same afternoon, with no time to wait. Let's start with the milk. Whole milk only. Skim milk will not stretch. 2% barely works. The fat in whole milk gives mozzarella its shine and stretch. Ultra-pasteurized milk will not work at all. Check the carton. The proteins have been heated so hard they can no longer form curds properly. Whole milk, not ultra-pasteurized, is sold in most grocery stores. It usually sits near the organic milk section. Read the label before you buy. You will need 1 gallon of whole milk. This makes close to 1 pound of finished mozzarella, roughly 1 bag from the store. Now, citric acid. This is a fine white powder, sold cheap in the canning section of most grocery stores. Amish families sometimes used fresh lemon juice instead. Since lemons grow easier than finding powder at a store years ago, both work the same. If using citric acid powder, dissolve 1½ teaspoons into 1/4 cup of cool water. Stir until it fully disappears. If using lemon juice instead, use 1/3 cup of fresh juice, strained to remove seeds and pulp. Fresh gives a cleaner flavor. You will also need rennet, but only a tiny amount. 1/4 of a rennet tablet, dissolved in 1/4 cup of cool water. Rennet gives mozzarella its stretch. Skipping it makes a cheese closer to ricotta, soft and crumbly instead of stretchy. Now we begin. Pour the gallon of milk into a large pot. Do not use aluminum. Stainless steel or enamel pots work best. Heat the milk slowly to 55 degrees. This is barely warm, not hot. A thermometer removes all guessing here. Once it hits 55 degrees, pour in your citric acid solution or your lemon juice, while stirring gently and constantly. Small curds start forming within seconds. This is the acid doing its work fast, unlike the slow culture used for Parmesan. Keep heating and stirring gently. Bring the temperature up to 88 degrees. The curds will separate further from the liquid whey. At 88 degrees, remove the pot from the heat completely. Add your dissolved rennet now, stirring for exactly 30 seconds. Then stop stirring. Movement after rennet ruins the set. Cover the pot and let it rest, untouched, for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the curd should look like a solid, slightly wobbly mass, similar to soft tofu. Cut it into large squares with a long knife, about 1 inch apart, going straight down through the pot. Return the pot to low heat. Warm it gently to 105 degrees, stirring slowly. The curds will firm up and shrink. Once at 105 degrees, pour the whole pot through a colander lined with cheesecloth. Press the curds together gently in your hands, squeezing out as much whey as possible. You'll have a soft, warm mass. Now comes the part that makes mozzarella different. Stretching. Heat a separate pot of water to 170 degrees. Place your curd ball into this hot water using a slotted spoon, letting it sit for about 30 seconds. Pull the curd out with gloved hands and begin stretching it like taffy. Pull it out long, then fold it back over itself. Repeat this 4 or 5 times. The curd goes from crumbly and rough to smooth, shiny, and elastic. This is real mozzarella. Once smooth and shiny, shape it into a ball by tucking the edges underneath and rolling it gently between your palms. Drop the shaped ball into a bowl of ice water immediately. This stops the cooking process and firms up the outside. Let it sit for 10 minutes. Then place it into a light salt brine for another 20 minutes to season the cheese all the way through. After that final soak, your mozzarella is finished. Fresh, soft, and pillowy on the inside with that classic slight give. 1 gallon of milk, a spoonful of powder, and 30 minutes of your time, done in your own kitchen, no factory involved. Fresh mozzarella does not act like the mozzarella from a store, and that surprises most people the first time. Store mozzarella is made to last weeks on a shelf. It's firm, rubbery, and holds its shape for a long time. Fresh mozzarella is soft, delicate, and meant to be eaten within days, not weeks. This is the trade-off for skipping every preservative. Let's talk about storage first, since this decides whether your batch lasts or spoils fast. Keep fresh mozzarella submerged in its own way, or in a light salt brine, inside the refrigerator. Never store it dry in a plastic bag. Without liquid around it, the surface dries out and turns rubbery within a single day. Stored properly in brine, fresh mozzarella lasts about 5 days in the refrigerator. This is shorter than spart. The flavor difference makes up for it completely. Amish families made small batches often, rather than one large batch. If you want to freeze mozzarella, slice it first into 1/4-inch rounds. Freezing a whole ball changes the texture badly once thawed, making it grainy and watery. Sliced rounds, frozen flat on a tray before bagging, thaw much closer to fresh texture. Now let's talk about texture problems, since this is where most beginners get discouraged on their first attempt. If your mozzarella turns out rubbery instead of soft, the milk was likely heated too fast. Stretching water above 175 degrees cooks the outside of the curd too quickly, tightening the proteins. If your mozzarella falls apart and won't hold together when stretching, the rennet step was likely skipped or measured wrong. Rennet is what gives structure. Without enough of it, you'll end up with something closer to a soft ricotta than mozzarella. If the cheese tastes sour or overly tangy, too much citric acid was used, or the milk sat too long. Stick close to the 1½ teaspoon measurement for 1 gallon of milk, and don't let it sit too long. If the finished cheese feels dry and crumbly, it likely sat too long in the ice bath or salt brine. 10 minutes in ice water and 20 minutes in brine is enough. Longer soaking pulls too much moisture back out. Let's talk about scaling this recipe up, since 1 gallon making 1 pound is a small batch. 2 gallons of milk, doubling every ingredient exactly, makes about 2 pounds of mozzarella in the same 30 minutes. The only change is your pot needs to be large enough to hold 2 gallons comfortably, with room to stir. Amish families making mozzarella for a large gathering often worked in these larger batches. The stretching step is really the only part that changes with scale. It becomes only slightly harder with more curd. Larger batches of curd take a few extra dips in the hot water to stay pliable while stretching. Now, let's talk about using the whey again, since 1 gallon of milk produces a good amount of it. Whey from mozzarella works exactly like whey from Parmesan. Use it in bread dough instead of water. Use it in soup stock instead of broth. Pour it over chicken feed or pig feed if you keep animals. One more use specific to mozzarella whey. It works well as a light marinade base for chicken before grilling. The slight acidity tenderizes the meat gently over 2 to 3 hours without the harshness of vinegar. Let's talk about fresh mozzarella varieties now, since the basic ball shape is only the starting point. Bocconcini are small, bite-sized mozzarella balls, about the size of a walnut. Pull off small pieces during the stretching stage and shape them individually before dropping each into the ice water. Burrata is a step beyond basic mozzarella, made by stretching a thin outer shell, then filling it with soft curd. This is more advanced, but it uses the exact same base recipe I just taught you, with an extra filling step. Smoked mozzarella involves cold smoking the finished cheese for about 1 hour using applewood or hickory chips. This adds a completely different flavor using the same base cheese at no extra ingredient cost beyond wood chips. Let's talk about cost again. A 1-pound ball of fresh mozzarella at a specialty grocery store runs $7 to $9. A bag of shredded mozzarella at a regular grocery store runs $4 to $5, and it is not the same. Your homemade batch comes out to under $5 for a full pound, using simple ingredients like milk and rennet. It takes 30 minutes, most of which is just waiting for temperatures to rise slowly on the stove. This is the cheese Amish families made the same afternoon they needed it. Not planned months in advance like a hard cheese. If Parmesan is patience, mozzarella is speed. Both come from the same two hands, just applied differently. Let's talk about using fresh mozzarella once it's made. Because this cheese behaves differently in cooking than the store-bought version most people grew up with. Fresh mozzarella has more moisture than store mozzarella. This means it melts faster and releases more liquid when heated. Understanding this difference changes how you use it in almost every dish. For pizza, this moisture is the biggest challenge. If you slice fresh mozzarella straight onto pizza dough, the extra water can make the crust soggy in the center. Amish farmers didn't make pizza often, but the same principle applies to any dish where moisture control matters. Slice fresh mozzarella and lay the pieces on a paper towel for 10 minutes before using it on pizza. This pulls out just enough surface moisture without drying out the cheese itself. Pat the top gently with another paper towel before placing it on the dough. Bake pizza with fresh mozzarella at a higher temperature than usual, if your oven allows it. 450 degrees or higher helps the crust set fast before excess moisture has time to soak in. Restaurants with wood-fired ovens hit temperatures near 800 degrees for exactly this reason. Cooking the pizza in 90 seconds before moisture becomes a problem. For caprese salad, fresh mozzarella is at its absolute best, since there's no cooking involved at all. Slice it thick, about 1/4 inch, and layer it with fresh tomato slices and basil leaves. Drizzle with olive oil and a small pinch of salt. This dish exists specifically to show off fresh cheese texture, and store mozzarella cannot compete here. For melting into sauces, like a baked pasta dish, tear fresh mozzarella into small chunks rather than slicing it. Torn pieces have more surface area and melt more evenly into a sauce than clean-cut slices do. Let's talk about a common question people ask once they've made their first batch. Why does my homemade mozzarella taste different from store mozzarella? The answer is simple. Store mozzarella often sits for days or weeks between production and your refrigerator. Fresh mozzarella made in your kitchen is often eaten within hours of finishing. That freshness changes the flavor completely, giving it a mild, milky sweetness that fades within a day or two, even in the refrigerator. If your first batch tastes bland compared to what you expected, this is not a mistake. This is simply what real, fresh mozzarella tastes like. Amish families ate it plain often. sometimes just torn apart by hand and eaten warm right after stretching, before it ever saw a plate. Now, let's cover a variation using buttermilk instead of citric acid. Since some families prefer working with what's already in their refrigerator, buttermilk contains natural acid, similar to citric acid or lemon juice, though slightly weaker. Use 1 full cup of buttermilk instead of the citric acid solution for 1 gallon of milk. The process is otherwise identical, though the curdling step may take a minute or 2 longer to fully separate. This buttermilk method produces a slightly tangier mozzarella, closer in flavor to the mozzarella made from raw farm milk that Amish families used most often. Some people prefer this deeper flavor over the cleaner, milder taste from citric acid. Let's talk about raw milk specifically, since mozzarella changes slightly with raw milk versus store-bought. Raw milk, if it's legal to buy and available from a local farm, makes noticeably better mozzarella. The higher fat content and different protein structure gives a richer flavor and a slightly better stretch during the taffy pulling stage. If using raw milk, you can often skip the rennet entirely and rely on the natural bacteria still present in the milk. This was the traditional Amish method before store-bought pasteurized milk became the common option. However, this method is less predictable for beginners, so I recommend still using a small amount of rennet until you're comfortable. Let's go back to troubleshooting one more time. If your curd tears instead of stretching smoothly, it's usually too cool. Dip it back into the 170-degree water for another 15 seconds before trying again. Cold curd cannot stretch. If your curd feels greasy and slippery, releasing fat as you stretch it, the water was likely too hot, breaking down the fat structure too fast. Lower the water temperature slightly for your next attempt, staying closer to 165 degrees instead of 175. If you can't get any stretch at all, the milk may have been ultra-pasteurized, despite the label, or too old. Fresh, properly labeled whole milk is the single most common fix for a batch that simply refuses to stretch. Let's talk about equipment one more time. Rubber gloves are essential for handling curd at 170 degrees. Bare hands cannot tolerate this heat long enough to stretch properly. Amish women often used wooden spoons instead of hands, folding and pulling the curd between them like taffy on a hook. You can also work the curd directly in the hot water using a slotted spoon to fold it over itself repeatedly. One more small tip. Keep a bowl of cold water next to your stretching station. Dip your gloved hands into this cold water between stretches. It keeps your gloves cool enough to grip the hot curd firmly without it slipping through your fingers. This entire process becomes faster and more natural after 2 or 3 attempts. The first batch teaches you what the curd should feel like. Every batch after that gets easier, faster, and more consistent, the same way any hands-on skill improves with repetition. Let's talk about the citric acid method versus the traditional Amish method in more detail, because there's an older way to make this cheese. Before citric acid powder was common in stores, Amish families used naturally soured milk to start the same process. Milk left out at room temperature for 8 to 12 hours begins souring on its own, developing the same acid needed to curdle it. This method takes longer and requires watching the milk closely, since souring too far turns it unusable, while souring too little won't curdle properly. Citric acid gives you control and consistency that natural souring cannot match, which is exactly why I taught you that method first. Still, if you want to try the traditional way once you're comfortable with the basic recipe, leave 1 gallon of whole milk on the counter. Cover it loosely with a cloth for about 10 hours in a warm kitchen. Check it by smell. It should smell tangy, not rotten. A rotten smell means it went too far and should be discarded. Once soured properly, proceed exactly as before. Heating slowly. Skip the citric acid solution entirely, since the milk has already acidified itself naturally. Now let's talk about a common mistake. Rushing the temperature increases is a mistake almost everyone makes with their second or third batch. Once they've grown confident, early success can make people careless. The first batch, followed exactly step by step, often turns out well. The second batch, done a little faster because you feel confident, often fails. Heat control matters every single time, not just the first time. Amish grandmothers repeated their exact steps for decades without shortcuts. And that consistency is exactly why their cheese never failed. Let's talk about milk fat percentage in more detail, since whole milk itself varies slightly between brands and sources. Standard whole milk sits around 3.5% fat. Some farm direct or cream top milk runs closer to 4.5%. Higher fat content generally makes stretching easier and produces a richer, shinier, finished cheese. If your store carries a higher fat option, sometimes labeled farmstead or cream top, choose that for mozzarella specifically. The extra cost is usually less than $1 per gallon, and the improvement in stretch and flavor is noticeable. Let's revisit citric acid measurements, since this is the most common reason people's first batch doesn't turn out right. 1.5 teaspoons for 1 full gallon is the standard. If you're using 3 quarts, reduce to 1 1/8 teaspoons. Guessing this measurement throws off how the curd forms. Always dissolve citric acid fully in water before adding it to milk. Sprinkling dry powder directly into milk causes it to clump and curdle unevenly, creating small hard lumps mixed with soft curd. Now let's talk about what to do with mozzarella that didn't turn out quite right, since even an imperfect batch should never go to waste. If your cheese turned out too rubbery, shred it instead and use it melted into a baked dish, where texture matters less. Baked ziti stuffed shells, or a simple grilled cheese, all hide a slightly firmer texture. Well, if your batch fell apart, don't discard it. This texture is essentially a soft farmer's cheese at that point. Salt it lightly and use it spread on bread or mixed into scrambled eggs. The same way Amish families used any imperfect curd. Nothing made from milk in an Amish kitchen was ever considered a true failure. It simply became a different dish. This mindset matters as much as any single step in the recipe itself. Let's talk about serving fresh mozzarella the Amish way. Warm mozzarella, torn by hand right after stretching, served with a small drizzle of local honey, was a common simple dessert. This pairing surprises people, but the mild sweetness of honey against warm, fresh cheese predates the modern caprese salad by generations. Mozzarella melted directly over fresh bread, straight from the oven, with a little butter underneath, was a common breakfast in colder months. This is simpler than any recipe found in a cookbook. But it uses the same fresh cheese at its absolute best, right after it's made. Let's do one more cost comparison, since I want the numbers to stick with you clearly by the end of this video. A small Italian specialty shop selling fresh mozzarella often charges $9 to $12 per pound for their product. This is essentially the same cheese, made the same way, sold back to you for 8 or 9 times what it cost to make. A family making 2 batches a week spends roughly $10 on ingredients. The specialty shop equivalent would cost $20 or more. Over 1 year, that gap alone totals over $500 just on one single type of cheese. This is the same lesson from every video I've made. The knowledge itself was never expensive. Somewhere along the way, families stopped passing it down, and companies were glad to sell it back at a markup nobody questioned.